I'm going to start and welcome everyone. And I wanted to show you that I came across, someone sent me this original brochure, original SCA brochure. And it says the Society for Commercial Archaeology is a unique national organization concerned with the artifacts and structures, signs, and symbols of the American commercial process, encompassing both the celebrated and anonymous work of many of America's best designers, the mass-produced forms of the machine age, and the vernacular conceptions of local builders. These elements comprise a significant part of our national heritage. And features of the American commercial environment include transportation facilities such as highways, airports, and bus stations, roadside development, gas stations, diners, and motels, components of the traditional business district, movie theaters, drugstores, and department stores, and recreation facilities, resorts, fairgrounds, and amusement parks. The SCA is concerned that these resources, while rapidly disappearing, are often considered too recent to be analyzed, recorded, or preserved. This was probably written in 1977. The goals of the society are to promote public awareness and exchange of information and to encourage the selective conservation of the commercial landscape. So I thought that is appropriate for wanting to advocate for Stuckey's and Stephanie Stuckey's quest to revitalize her business. And then what also happened was we read that Docomomo was having leisure and travel as their theme for this summer. So we wanted to connect with them. And we decided that this, Stephanie Stuckey would be the person to do this for us. And so we reached out to the to Docomomo, and they referred us to the Georgia chapter. And then I saw Stephanie Cherry Farmer's name on the email. And we go way back to her days at Preservation, New Jersey. And they were the statewide advocate. And I reached out to them and they helped me nominate the Motels of the Wildwoods and the Diners of New Jersey to the most endangered list. And you all know how I've tried to celebrate the Diners of New Jersey. And yes, I can tell you we do have our next event is June 17 to 19, 2022, but as far as I know, it's sold out. And then our next event is in Erie, PA in 2023. But I am trying to get another event between now and then, but you'll have to stay tuned. So
Michael, can I just suggest before we get going that everybody self-mute themselves if they are not speaking? Even if you think you're going to be quiet, sometimes there's ancillary noise. Thank you.
So take it away, Stephanie Cherry Farmer.
Hi, guys. Thank you so much, Michael. And I think what Michael said is a great foray into just a few words on who Docomomo is, because Michael's brochure spoke to the idea of SCA advocating for things that were, at least at that time, in many cases considered too recent to be historic or to be viewed as significant. And that's exactly one of the tenets of Docomomo and why Docomomo was founded. That's one of the things that our front webpage says, is that we try to help educate and advocate for things that for architecture and design that in many cases people consider too young to be significant. So our tagline at Docomomo is moving modern forward, and that's what we aim to do. Docomomo US is actually a committee of Docomomo International, which is a nonprofit organization founded in 1988 in the Netherlands, and dedicated to documentation and conservation of buildings, sites, and neighborhoods of the modern movement. And that's hence our acronym name, Docomomo, Documentation and Conservation of the Modern Movement. So that's our funky name. The modern movement encompasses a period of architecture and design spanning roughly from the 1930s to the 1980s. So that's what the span of time we're really focused on. And Docomomo US was founded in 1995. And the idea is to serve all of the public that's interested in design, architecture, urbanism, landscape, and history that is from the modern movement. And Docomomo is often credited as the initiator of interest in preserving the recent past, that interest which we've seen pick up pretty significantly in the past decade. So that's really exciting that more people are getting engaged. Docomomo US advocates and educates about modern through a union of regional chapters that share its members' knowledge and enthusiasm for modern architecture and design. So the Georgia chapter is one of those chapters. We are dedicated to the preservation of modern architecture, landscape, and design through advocacy, education, and documentation. Our goal is to enrich our communities and our culture by incentivizing understanding, appreciation, and preservation of the modern movement and America's built environment. So all of that is a very academic way of saying that basically we are a bunch of history nerds that really love exploring, discovering, and gawking at mid-20th century places. So if this sounds like you, I really encourage you to join Docomomo US. And I'm gonna put the Docomomo US and Docomomo Georgia websites in the chat in just a minute. And the Docomomo Georgia website is a great collection of modern resources specific to Georgia. So if you're interested in Georgia history, Georgia modern buildings, Georgia modern landscapes, be sure to think of us as a good resource for you to start with. So I just want to close by thanking the Society for Commercial Archaeology for having us here tonight and letting us partner with you on this. And we look forward to many, many more partnerships. So now I will introduce the honorary and amazing Stephanie Stuckey. Suddenly, at the next green exit sign or around the next curve, the sloping teal blue roof would come into view like an oasis. It was as familiar as the golden arches of McDonald's or the orange steeples at Howard Johnson motels. This is something that architect Brad Moore said. He talks about growing up in the Midwest, and he felt like he was always off to visit relatives in Macon, Georgia. And when he did that, he couldn't help but notice the red and yellow Stuckey's billboards. He remembers noticing the interior of the store had a ceiling opened up to see the roof beams. And he says that that actually influenced his decision to study architecture. So Stuckey's is an influential company, and there's a lot of people that love and remember it. We've already talked a little bit about that tonight. Atlantan Stephanie Stuckey is a third-generation CEO of Stuckey's, and tonight she's going to share her journey to bring back this iconic retail roadside chain founded by her grandfather. She's going to show us some never-before-published images of early stores and take us through the evolution of the store's design and architecture. So with that, I hand it over to Miss Stuckey herself.
Well, thank you so much. And can everyone see the screen?
Absolutely.
Yes. Okay, start from beginning.
And once again, colleagues on this call, please mute yourself if you are not a speaker. Please, we can hear you. We can hear you whisper to each other.
And I am also cautioning my daughter, who I have told repeatedly today she cannot be making a lot of noise. So, honey, be quiet. Keep it down. So first and foremost, I'm just really grateful for all of you for what you do. I am a member of SCA and have been attending the Zoom meetings, and I'm about to join Docomomo because everything you said, I am a gawker of mid-century modern architecture and love to geek out on all this wonderful roadside architecture. So couldn't be more delighted, Stephanie, that we're partnering with you and sharing this evening to talk about not just Stuckey's, but it's much bigger than that. It's about the road trip and reviving that wonderful experience of getting on the back roads and exploring America, and also exploring the wonderful architecture and structures and entertainment venues. And Stuckey's is just part of that overall narrative. So I very much feel like I'm among friends. I will give a quick shout out to, I have joining us tonight is a friend of mine who works with Stuckey's. His name's Jamie Allen, and he helps us tell the narrative story of Stuckey's, and he does our email newsletters. I invite you to join our email listserv. We try not to overwhelm you, but we're very into storytelling. So if you get our newsletters, it's not just going to be a bunch of selling stuff. It's going to be storytelling, because we're really about weaving the narrative of the road trip. And I don't know if he's able to join or not, but I did invite my designer, Mac Fraga, and I'm going to show some of his designs. So if he does join, Mac, just unmute and weigh in when I get to showing some of your beautiful designs. So with that, I'm going to go through my presentation, and I'll start at the very beginning, which is in 1937. That's my grandfather, W.S. Stuckey Sr. He was in law school at the University of Georgia, had to drop out during the Great Depression because his family couldn't afford to keep him there. And he was working on a cotton farm in middle Georgia and absolutely hated it and wanted a better life. And he went around town looking for a side hustle to make extra money and hopefully get out of farming cotton. And a local pecan sheller said, well, I don't have a job for you, but if you go around town and start buying up pecans from the local farmers, and I say pecan, so excuse me, I know most people say pecan, but he said, if you buy up those pecans, you can sell them for a few cents extra and you can make a profit. And that's exactly what he did. And he drove around and he started selling those pecans. And he was accompanied by a man named John King, an African-American farmhand who was very much part of the beginning of Stuckey's. And Mr. King stayed with my grandfather throughout his career. I always try to highlight that because I want to recognize the role that he played in the beginning. And I've reached out and actually connected with some of King's children to acknowledge the role that they played in helping start the company as just this little roadside shed. So this is the original shed. My grandfather started selling pecans from that shed when he made enough of a profit. And from that shed, he realized he could make even more money if he sold things other than pecans. So he enlisted my grandmother and her bridge club, and they learned how to make divinity and pralines and fudge and what we're best known for, the pecan log roll, which is an old family recipe. And he added to that mix quilts and honey and coconut bars. We were talking about that before we started. We sold a lot of coconut over the years. It just grew from there. And after that, he was able to make up enough money and he got some loans. He was always heavily leveraged throughout his career to build the very first Stuckey's. That's in Eastman, Georgia. And there's still a building there to this day. I'll show it later. Unfortunately, it's not owned or operated as a Stuckey's, but that site has continuously been maintained, has had a presence as a Stuckey since that early beginning. So that was his first store. And you can see he sold jellies and candy, Coca-Colas, and we've always sold gas. And this was the second store. He did well enough to start a second store in Kingsland, Georgia. And that was followed pretty quickly. He was doing well by a third store in Unadilla, Georgia. The things were going great. And then World War II hit. And that's when we experienced some tough times. There was sugar rationing. He was not able to get the product he needed for his candy. And he would make the candy on site in the stores. So with the sugar rationing, he had to be very creative and he started trading all sorts of stuff to keep the business going. He would save up all sorts of like shoe stamps and nylons and trade them for the sugar he needed. But unfortunately, he continued to have hard times. He had to shut down one of his stores. Another one of his stores was burned down by moonshiners who stole all his sugar to make alcohol, and they burned the store down. So he's left with one store. What saved him was, like many other candy makers during World War II, Wrigley's and Hershey's, M&M's, they all sold candy to the U.S. Army, and that got you access to sugar. So that's how he survived the war years, was selling candy to the troops. And it made him be inventive. And he came up with this design for boxes. He had to package his candy. So he started boxing the candy, and he had to have a little manufacturing facility. So that's when he really started scaling his operation. So he built a candy plant, very rudimentary. It was Bunsen burners in a warehouse, but that was the first beginnings of having a real professional candy operation, was World War II. After the war is when Stuckey started to grow. Post-war prosperity, the GIs come home, they're having children, they're buying cars, they're going on vacation. And back then, the highways was it. You didn't fly. And so everyone was taking to the road. And my grandfather just started rapidly expanding at that point. And I think it's, what was really interesting to me and sort of researching the history of Stuckey's is I have not found any other roadside retail that was around as early as we've been. So I think I'm correct in saying we were the OG, we were the original roadside retail store that offered gas and souvenirs and a clean restroom and a cold drink and a hot snack. We were the very first, and we were the first to operate that as a chain. And I've got some beautiful archival images that I've been very blessed to have inherited when I took over the company. And I love showing these old images of how he displayed his stores. And he had no background in marketing or retail, and he just had a good people sense. He understood what customers wanted, and he was totally obsessed with going into stores and talking to people and knowing what they really were interested in buying when they pulled over. And of course, they loved the candy. And I love this image, not only because it's a great image, and that's my great aunt Ruth on the far left, by the way. All the family worked in the business. We had tons and tons of Stuckeys owning and operating the stores, working in the plant. And my Aunt Ruth was no exception. That's her husband, George, next to her. And the stores, my grandfather had this basic layout that you can still see to this day if you go to an old store. And I call it the candy wall. You would have this wall in the very back, and it would lead to the restroom. So he made sure most people were driving and pulled over primarily because they needed to use the facilities. So he knew they were going to go to the restroom. And it always drives me crazy when I pull over today at a modern place and they've got the restrooms right when you walk in to the left. I think that's so stupid. My grandfather made you walk through the whole store, and he literally created like a maze where you had to walk through all this merchandise and especially walk by what I love to call the wall of candy to get to the restrooms. And inevitably people would want to buy our product as a result. So here's another example of that. That's actually my Uncle J.H. with the cocked hat. He was very dapper. And it literally, like, you could not get to the restrooms unless you walked around this maze. And I think that's a great example of it. There were just piles and piles and piles of pecan log rolls. He would build these like leaning towers of Pisa of the displays. And I think the display is so much part of the architecture of the stores, because he really had such a great insight into retailing. And he wanted to create an experience. He didn't want you just to go into a store and think that you were in any place that was, you know, just like any other. He wanted to create something unique and special. And he wanted to have that consistency. So you knew you were going to a Stuckey's, and it was a chain, but every single store had its own personality. You would buy local souvenirs. You would see products that were made by artisans in the area. And I've got another slide that'll have a basket, some homemade baskets. Some of the stores had beehives, and they made their own honey on site. And one of my favorites is some of the stores started having talking mynah birds. And that's one of my earliest memories. I don't know if anyone listening remembers that, but people to this day tell me they remember going into a Stuckey store and having a mynah bird. This was the only image I could find of the mynah birds, because apparently the health department shut it down. Breaks my heart, because we had those mynah birds in about 20 of the stores. But this was the only image I could find. And I think it's so ironic because it was a picture related to passage of an act that enabled more foreign visitors to come to this country. And there was an article in our newsletter that said, be nice to our foreign visitors. We want to welcome foreign visitors to the interstates or to, at that point, the highways, the back roads. And, you know, this picture accompanied it. And I love it because it's visitors from India. And if you see that girl on the right, she looks so dejected. And it's because the mynah bird is native to India. So I think she's come all this way to the US to see something special about our country. And, you know, there she is seeing something she can get right back at home. But for most people, touring a Stuckey store and seeing a mynah bird was something very exotic and different. And I just love, I wish I had more photos of that, but that was just encapsulates to me the fun of going to a Stuckey's. And the other thing I'll say about this image on the lower right-hand side if you'll see that bottom picture, there's candy cigarettes. We used to sell so many of those. It was so much fun. And it's really, really hard to find those anymore because the government and different people have cracked down and said it encourages kids to smoke. And I don't know, I used so many of those candy cigarettes as a kid, and I've never smoked a cigarette in my life. So I think it's a shame that those aren't around as much. The other thing I love about that photo is if you see in the background, there's the Fred Allen novelties. And there's so many great novelty and souvenir companies that my grandfather dealt with that are just wonderful retro vintage items. And I love pulling up these old images and discovering those. It's like rediscovering my childhood. And this is just another image of the stores, and you can see how it was just chock-a-block full of inventory. Like you were just overwhelmed with all these kitschy, fun souvenirs. I like this image because it shows the snack bar. People often compare us to Cracker Barrel, and I'm frankly flattered by the comparison. I like Cracker Barrel, but we're very different. Stuckey's was never a full-service sit-down restaurant, and that was a deliberate decision by my grandfather. He wanted people in the stores shopping and spending money. So he wanted them to grab a quick snack. He rarely offered seating because he didn't want you sitting down. He wanted you walking around so you could grab a pimento cheese sandwich or a hot dog, but he wanted you walking around the store and spending money. So that corner snack bar image to me really sort of epitomizes how he kind of put the snack bar off in the corner. You could grab that hot snack, but he wanted you walking through the store. This is another image. What I liked about this one is how the people dressed. This was back in the era where you would go to church on Sunday and then you go for a drive. And so people would often come up to Stuckey's in their Sunday best, and stopping at Stuckey's was an experience. And that's something that's so lacking today when you travel on the interstate and you pull over, and I don't want to dish TA and Loves and Pilot and all the others. I stop at those as well, but they're all the same. And you don't get the sense of being at something that's special or local. And you certainly wouldn't ever dress to go there or think that after church you would visit a Pilot as a special event. And I think there's still a need for that today. And this picture is just so much fun to me, seeing those folks in their ties walking around and just enjoying that wonderful retail experience. Another thing that was very special about my grandfather's business model is that he had the stores all owned and operated by husband and wife teams who would live in the stores, and they own the stores. So there was a real pride in keeping the stores looking wonderful. It was not just a store. It was their total, it was their income, it was their livelihood, and it was their home. And the pictures at the bottom were sent to me by the woman you see on the lower right-hand corner. Her name's Kathy Shera, and she grew up in a Stuckey's. And she said it was so much fun because literally her living room was the candy showroom, and her kitchen was the snack bar. And there she is working. She said she worked there her entire childhood, and those are her parents on the left. And that there's I hear from many Stuckey families who grew up in a Stuckey's. And I think that's special. You don't see that as much. And there's a real pride in how the store is maintained as a result. This photo illustrates sort of the local products. There's Tupelo honey. I referenced the homemade baskets. I just love that you would go into a Stuckey's and you would see a different assortment of souvenirs based on where you are from. Now, having said that, my grandfather really made his profit from two things. It was not from franchises. It was from the sale of gas, and it was from the sale of product. So he owned a distribution facility, and the novelties he would source from all sorts of vendors. He had wonderful trusted vendor relationships. He would source product, but he would also get local products to make sure that every store had that very individualized experience and a sense of place. And I think this epitomizes that sense of place. I have tons and tons of postcards. I'm always buying Stuckey's postcards on eBay, and they're collectibles. And this just epitomizes that he really tried to make sure that every store had something special. And this was in Brewster, Kansas, and he made a postcard that just celebrated this little small town of Brewster. And Stuckey celebrated small town America. We weren't in Chicago or Atlanta or Des Moines. We were in small town America. We were on the interstates, and we were before the interstate, we were on the back roads. And so we celebrate that. And even to this day, I feel such a strong affinity for small town America because those are our roots. We were also known for our billboards. At our peak, we had 4,000 billboards. And my grandfather would typically start advertising 100 miles out, and they would get closer and closer to each other as you approach the stores. And it would drive people crazy to see all those billboards, but just like the Burma Shave and the South of the Border and the Wall Drugs, you would stop because you'd seen them so much. I love that sign on the right. I wish that were still around today, but those look just like Norge balls. And if there's any Norge ball fellow fans on the call tonight, you'll appreciate that. I would give anything if that sign were still around. And then I wanted to include these two images. The one on the upper left-hand corner is the only one I know that was made by the famed photographer John Margolis. And that photo is actually in the Library of Congress. And then the one on the lower right-hand side has been restored by a bar and grill called Motorheads. And I think it's in Indiana. I'll have to double check that, but I love that they restored that. And these are brand new images that I just uploaded today, so never before seen. These are sign makers. At our peak, my grandfather not only had a candy plant, he also had a sign making company and a trucking company. And the artistry that went into making the signs, the billboards were hand painted, his plastic signs he molded on site, and it was just beautiful craftsmanship. I'm sure it was very uncomfortable in there too. It looks very hot. I was in Eastman, Georgia. And then this is one of the sign painters. One of the things my father's told me that I love is, well, it's funny. The sign painters, he said, were always kind of loopy because the chemicals in the paint would get them high. And he said he remembers as a kid going in there and that they were all just like high on smell and paint all day long in this cramped warehouse. So that was one of my dad's early memories as a kid, was visiting the sign painters. So I wanted to include, I'm sorry. Oh, so I wanted to include this image of sort of a turning point, not only for Stuckey's, but for Roadside America, was obviously the interstate highway system in the 1950s, which extended for decades, but really started 1956. Suddenly, all of the stores that my grandfather had built were about to become irrelevant or at risk of becoming irrelevant because they were on the back roads and everyone was starting to travel the interstates. And that's when I think it was really a pivotal moment for Stuckey's, not only in how we were going to continue as a business, but in our architecture. And so I wanted to spend some time on the architecture and show, this is a pre-interstate highway. This is an early magazine ad that I actually found that was in our archives. And it shows the early stores and what they looked like before the interstate came along. And this is a great image of one of those real early stores. And I found there were several basic types. There were like 3 types. And Stephanie, feel free to weigh in on this, but there was sort of the A-frame, the triangle roof design. So you would see that a lot. And then he also had these more boxy designs. I think these dated a little earlier. Unfortunately, I don't have dates on these, but this looks like it would have been more like 1940s, maybe.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah. And so we had those designs. And then we had sort of the beginnings, especially that Callahan, Florida and the Centerville, Indiana, where it's starting to look like what many people remember as the classic blue roof slope Stuckey's. So that was also leading up to the interstate. And then when my grandfather had to make the decision to move to the interstate, and he shut these old stores down and he moved, he decided at that point he was going to have some consistency in his architectural renderings. And so that's when, traveling on beautiful Interstate 80, I love that postcard, like beautiful Interstate 80 postcard. But that's when he started getting his standardized design, and not just that slope roof, but you see that carriage image. which my father came up with. And I asked my dad, I'm like, why do we have a carriage? We're a car-centered store. Why is there a carriage with a horse and carriage? And he's like, I don't know, Old South or something. So honestly, I've never been a fan of the carriage image, and I've done away with it. But those old stores had the carriage image, had the sloped roof, that bright teal when it was first painted. The whole idea is you would just see it as you were driving on the interstate. My grandfather would always cite his stores to the right of the exit, so it was visible. And preferably he'd choose locations that had a slope. And he wanted it to be the right as you were heading north, because his idea was many of his customers were, he called them Yankees, they would be going down to Florida on vacation, and they wouldn't want to spend their money until they were ending their vacation. They wanted to save up their money before, so they would have enough money for their hotel and their meals and their entertainment. But on the way back, they might want to spend some money as they drove back. So he wanted his stores really accessible to those northbound lanes. And he wanted that bright blue roof. He wanted that yellow and red sign. And he entered into a deal with Texaco at that point. And he made a ton of money off of Texaco. He got a percentage of every gallon of gas sold. And my favorite is that zigzag gas canopy. And he came up with the zigzag gas canopy at that point. And that image is actually a painting that I have in my living room. And those arrows point out, you can't really see it, but that's my grandfather. He has a little cameo in the painting. He had himself painted in, and he's got this real mischievous grin on his face. And the other arrow on the right is his secretary who commissioned the painting. And I love that she had herself painted in there too. And this is just another rendering or another image of the classic store. And I like the weather vane. And I wish my grandfather were still around. I would love to ask him, like, did you copy that off of Howard Johnson's? Because it's very reminiscent of that Simple Simon Pieman weather vane that you see on the Howard Johnson's that were around at the same time. These are just examples of some of those classic blue roofs that I think most of us remember. The one on the upper right, I don't have the location other than I think it's somewhere in Colorado, but I love it because there's someone on a horse. So I actually took a horse to the Stuckeys. And then this is in Arizona and New Mexico. It's Boland's Enterprise. So any fans of the Thing in Arizona, Mike Boland, who owned and runs Boland's Enterprise, and he owns a lot of these kitschy roadside places in Arizona and New Mexico. He worked with Stuckey's for many years and owned a lot of Stuckey's. So there's a strong connection. If you're a fan of the Thing, there's a strong connection with the Thing and Stuckey's and Mike Boland, who was a longtime associate and partner of ours. I found some old architectural plans. So anyone want to build the Stuckey's, I got the plans. They're probably not to code, but I like this rendering that shows the slope. And then of course the roof, which I absolutely love. So it's at this point that he came up with that beautiful roof. And this one is in Somerton, South Carolina. My nephew actually owns and operates the store. And my grandfather was inspired by a ship hull. So, if you think about it, it really does look like a ship hull that's turned up. And the woodwork is just stunning. And it breaks my heart. Sometimes I see, if you've ever been to a Citrus World in Florida, there's a couple of Citrus World locations that are old Stuckey's, and they've covered up the roof. And I just can't fathom why someone would want to cover up that roof, other than they tell me the HVAC bills are pretty high. This is Paxico, Kansas. And I like this one because they actually kept the chandeliers. It breaks my heart to see that people didn't keep the chandeliers. Why you wouldn't want to retain that wonderful fixture. The original stores had these beautiful chandeliers and they had fans. Another aspect was that the husband and wife teams lived in the stores. I've had a hard time finding decent images of the living accommodations, but if you go into any of the original stores, almost all of them still have the living quarters attached. The store in Johnstonville, Ohio, that is operating still as a Stuckey's, they've turned the living quarters into a poker lounge. So sometimes you'll see inventive uses of the living quarters, but a lot of times they're just, these are old abandoned stores. But I like also the photo that shows the woman and her child and the man and his fish. Like, this was people's homes. It was not just the store. So that's why the stores were so special. It was a home. And this was constructing one of the roofs. And it's not a great image. I just discovered this image today, by the way. But I like the close up, and you see the little turrets, I guess, on the roof. And this is while they were building a new store. And then this is a pretty good image too. I like this image also. This is from the Stuckey's newsletter because it's adjacent to a Holiday Inn. And that's another thing my grandfather did, was he liked to be near other establishments that he thought were complementary. And also he was friends with Kimmons Wilson, the founder of Holiday Inn. And it absolutely breaks my heart that IHG has done away with all those marquee signs. And my understanding is there aren't any of them left at all. I think there may be one in a museum. If anyone knows, maybe in the comments we can talk about that. But I love that. I love that beautiful sign. And my grandfather liked to be right next to Holiday Inn. That's my grandfather, and he's drinking a cup of coffee. And I wanted to include this image because it reminds me of the coffee story that I love to tell. My grandfather chose where to site his stores based on some of the factors I've already mentioned, but he would also get in his car with a cup of coffee, drink the coffee, and when nature called, that's how far apart he would space his stores, which I think is very scientific. And to this day, I think that one makes a lot of sense. Most people pull over when they need to use the facilities, not necessarily for any other reason. And the Stuckey's history is really the history of the road trip. I absolutely love this image. I wish I knew who took it. I found it on the internet. I would love to get permission to use it. I haven't used it publicly, but I think it's okay here. I don't have permission to use it, but this to me just is why Stuckey's has sticking power to this day, is that we were synonymous with the road trip. We came into our prime when the road trip was at its prime, and we really were the traveler's best friend. My grandfather liked to say every traveler is a friend, and we were very welcoming and hospitable. During the civil rights movement, we were one of the very few places that was a chain in the South that was not segregated. So we've always just had this reputation of where you can stop when you're going on a road trip and you know you're going to be treated right. And this is another image I found on the internet, and just the fun of the road trip. And I was the kid in the back of the station wagon in the 1970s, just like that little girl. So these are just some fun images. This one was found in a thrift store. It's a Kodachrome slide. It was found with a bunch of vacation photos from Florida. This is the only one of Stuckey's. And I actually have this photographer's permission to use this one. We also had a small number of hotels called Stuckey's Carriage Inn. There were 4 of them. There was Tennessee, and I can't remember the city. There was Altamont, Illinois, Jekyll Island, Florida, and Eastman, Georgia. The one in the lower right-hand corner is Illinois, Altamont, Illinois, and they had a little Oktoberfest, and all the employees dressed up. And I think that is just so ridiculously charming. The sign is amazing. Breaks my heart. The sign's no longer around, but those were the signs. And I'm sure he was influenced by his friend Kimmons Wilson with Holiday Inn. I just love Stephanie and Docomomo. Y'all can appreciate the beautiful mid-century modern fun architecture and interior design of these hotels. None of them are around. That lounge just looks like something you'd expect Dean Martin to swing on in and get a gin and tonic or something. This is the Carriage Inn in Eastman, Georgia. And that's actually my father and his old girlfriend in the pool. I think it's very funny. And then I just want to share a few of the ads because this was the golden age of advertising. This was when Mad Men, and all those wonderful, fun, mid-century modern images that I think are just iconic came into their prime. And when I took over Stuckey's, we have almost no budget. And I've just been repurposing these wonderful ads and getting great results. That image in the middle was my best performing ad on Facebook last year, and I paid nothing for it. I just reused it. I love the little pecan log roll car and pack your trip with pleasure. Just beautiful, beautiful images. So real briefly, I'll give the history of where we are, what happened to Stuckey's, right? And then I'll open it up for questions and dialogue. But certainly the oil embargo, the Arab oil embargo in the 70s hurt road trip travel, and many establishments on the interstate suffered, and we were no exception. The other thing was my grandfather sold Stuckey's in 1964, a year before I was born. He sold it to Pet Corporation, best known for its evaporated milk. So the company completely fell out of family hands. And there was also the Airline Deregulation Act, which made airfare affordable. So people weren't driving as much. They were flying. Stuckey's was out of family hands. And it started out as a good relationship with Pet, but in very short order, the CEO of Pet, who was very close to my grandfather and brought him on, he died suddenly of a heart attack in his 40s. My grandfather, who was involved as the head of the Stuckey's division of Pet, was ousted. This all happened in like 1970. And my grandfather took early retirement. He was no longer involved with the company. And he died in 1977. And he died, frankly, sad about how Stuckey's was being run. And, it's unfortunate because it hadn't completely plummeted at that point, but I think he saw what was happening. And so under Pet, Stuckey's did not fare well. And then Pet got taken over in a hostile takeover by a Chicago railroad conglomerate. And they decided to shutter the stores. There were some company-owned stores. There were certainly a lot more franchise stores, but they just started terminating the franchises, shutting down the stores. They didn't see the value of the company, and we just plummeted. And so there were decades there where the brand really suffered. Our stores became strip clubs and porn shops, gun stores, tattoo parlors. They were all outside of zoning ordinances, and truckers would pull over in a sort of a haven of all sorts of dens of inequity. They just became something that my grandfather would really have hated to see. And my father, fortunately, fast forward to 1985, my father had served in Congress for 10 years, and he started his own company, Interstate Dairy Queen Corporation. He owned the franchise rights to Dairy Queens on the interstate highway system. And so he had his own successful business, but he was able to get Stuckey's back. They were losing so much money, the Chicago Railroad conglomerate basically gave it to him. So my father got the company back. But what he did at that point, because he was so successful with Dairy Queen, he just started merging Stuckey's with Dairy Queen. And the very few stores left, he largely turned them into Dairy Queens and had just like a little Stuckey's section. So, oops, I think I kind of, okay. I was gonna show some of the images from my dad's years. I don't know what's happened to my slides, hold on. Okay, I'm missing some slides, but that's okay. So he did this, what he called the Stuckey's Express concept. My dad sold his Dairy Queen business to Warren Buffett a decade ago, and he and his business partners all retired. And they left Stuckey's with a skeleton crew running it. And over the past decade, the business really suffered. And since 2015, Stuckey's had been losing money, like 6 figures loss every year. So fast forward to me, I'm an environmental attorney, had no upbringing in this. I had been head of sustainability for the city of Atlanta. And I literally am sitting at my desk one day and I get an email from my dad's former business partners asking me if I wanted to buy Stuckey's. They didn't want it. They were retired and it was losing money. So I did it. I bought the company because I loved the brand and I knew what it was capable of. And so I started on a road trip visiting all the stores, and frankly, I saw the good, the bad, and a lot of ugly. What I bought was basically a brand. We did not own or operate any stores. We have about 20 freestanding stores still around that are operating as the Stuckeys. Some of them look great. Some of them look okay. Some of them look totally terrible, but they're all outside franchises. We have about 45 locations that are the store within a store concept. Most of those are not going to be, well, none of those are the classic Stuckey stores that we remember. We have a distribution facility, and we make most of our money off of the sale of product today. But we still have brand value, and that's what I bought. And I showed, we've been in 2 recent major feature films, The Irishman and The Green Book. So I really brought, what I purchased, what I bought was a brand. This shows what has become of the stores, right? This is the co-branding concept. Really ugly logo, in my opinion. Love my dad, but he did that 70s, 80s, or that 80s logo that I'm really not crazy about. These are some of the billboards that were around. So in my opinion, a real dilution of the brand. I don't know if Mac Fraga's on the line. Mac, are you on? Doesn't sound like it. So I hired a designer we really went back to the original Stuckey's logo from like that 1940 stores that you saw. And this on the somewhat of a classic image, and I think we came up with a decent compromise. On the left is the sign that's about to go up at our new candy plant. This is kind of what I've inherited, right? This branding, which, you know, the lower right hand, that hunky dory looks like vomit. Like this is the design of the product that I've been dealing with. And so this is what I'm doing with it. This is our new line. I'm trying to refresh the brand with the classic images. I like to say I'm moving forward while looking back. You know, I'm respecting the past and trying to put a fresh spin on it. This is our new product line, new packaging, new merchandise. We've got a pecan log roll beer. We're about to come out with pecan pimento cheese and pecan ice cream. All of these are collaborations. We still have some of the classic stores around. Unfortunately, a lot of them are, you know, these hybrids. I hate that the roof is red. It's Dairy Queen red. It should be blue. So, you know, slow progress. These are some of those stores that are still around. This is me on my road trips. Really love exploring other classic brands and learning from them. And then I merged about 8 months ago with a business partner, and he owns a pecan company. And so together we bought a candy plant in Rennes, Georgia. So for the first time since 1964, we own and operate and make our own candy again. The new line literally just came out 2 weeks ago, and we're super excited about it. We closed on that deal January 29th. And I love it because right across the street from the candy plant in Rennes, Georgia is an old Stuckey's, and it's still there. So my dream is to buy that and make it a Stuckey's again. But I think that's good karma. Like, that is literally right across the street from the candy plant. These are our new displays. So even if we can't have as many standalone stores, you can have that sense of a Stuckey store. And we have some 300 retail partners, and it's growing every day.
Yeah.
And these are some of our retaal partners.
No, actually,
and that's me touring old stores. So I'm going to end with this.
The room gets a little hot.
You want more, Jeremy?
Can somebody mute?
Hold on.
Take it. There's a ton, Jeremy.
If somebody who is
if everybody can mute, please.
Talking about a ton, we can hear everything you're saying. Please mute.
Excellent. Okay, so I'm going to close with this image. If you remember at the very beginning, I showed my grandfather at the shed, the original pecan stand that started it all in 1937. I got a tip a couple weeks ago from a man in Eastman, Georgia, and he said, you know, that old shed is still around. It's off this dirt road behind a warehouse. And I drove out there, and there it is. It's still standing. And I am working to preserve it And I want to bring it to Rennes, Georgia, put it outside of our candy plant. We have a small factory retail store, and I want to open it up and sell pecans out of it again. So that's really exciting to me. And a Georgia Tech professor contacted me, and he wants to make it a school project for his construction and design class. And so I think I'm getting some pro bono help in the project. So that's it. I will
Stephanie, can I
open it up for questions?
Can I ring in there, Stephanie? So I'm Jamie Allen. I work with Stephanie on the brand narrative for Stuckey's. And the thing you were saying there when you were talking about buying the brand, I think what you were saying and what you were showing in all the pictures is that you were creating an investment in story and the Stuckey story and the history. As a bit of background, Stephanie and I met in Atlanta, and as a lot of you probably know, Atlanta is a city that's notorious for tearing down its history, like literally tearing down the buildings where historic things happened. But there are some people that are working to preserve that history. And actually, Stephanie and I were both working in a building called Constellations on Sweet Auburn, that is actually also known as the John Wesley Dobbs building. And if you know John Wesley Dobbs, you know he had a significant role in civil rights history. And that building was actually one of several buildings that were saved by the community and by a developer named Gene Kansas. Believe it or not, a developer did a good thing in Atlanta and saved the building. But we actually were in a building where the history was saved and where story was important. And when we first met and she mentioned Stuckey's to me, I knew what Stuckey's was, even though I didn't know what Stuckey's was, right? Like I knew something about Stuckey's. And so for me, helping her out over the last, I guess it's been over a year now, one of the things that I'm impressed with and I'm challenged by is that, like in this presentation just now, like she told me a dozen new things that I didn't know about Stuckey's. There's so many things to the history. It's such a vast history that that's the challenge. A lot of companies that you're working with, when you're trying to get their story, you're trying to drag out the story and get them to invent a story, right? With this particular company, Stuckey's, it has a built history. And even though a lot of those buildings are now gone, the stories are still there. And as an example, we did a stories contest recently, and we just asked people, we said, send in your stories about Stuckey's. That was the only rule. And, you know, dozens of people sent in stories about their memories, their childhood memories of Stuckey's. And it was hard to pick a winner. We had to pick a winner. We had 4 other semifinalists, but it's just the joy of working with this company. And one of the reasons that we want this to succeed is because you're not only, you know, it's not just a company on the side of the road that's selling gas. It's people's lives. It's their memories with their families. And as I'm sure all you know, there's a lot more to the built environment and what the built environment provides to our histories. So I just wanted to throw that out there before we,
Well said. I mean, it's about building community, and it's building community through that storytelling and that connectivity. And that's how a brand has sticking power, is that special memories that people have. I will say, and I think I lost a slide, but there are so many ghost Stuckey's out there. I mean, at our peak, we had 368 stores in 40 states. So people are constantly sending me these ghost Stuckey's. Like, I think they expect me to revive them. I would, if I win the lottery, I buy a ticket every week, so you never know. But otherwise, it's just slow but steady progress, you know. But there's hundreds of those closed Stuckey's still around because they're in the middle of nowhere. So people just keep them there.
Well, one of the comments, somebody said that they think Buc-ee's might be the closest in concept to this today.
Oh,
you and they will spark a resurgence, it says. Although I'm not sure what the gift shop at Come and Go, Minnesota and Iowa would look like. And then somebody said that they think Buc-ee's in Texas appropriated that Stuckey's merchandise concept.
Okay, we're among friends. Let me just dish a little about Buc-ee's. Yes, they did, frankly, appropriate. And all's fair, I guess, in love and war and business. One of the founders of Buc-ee's used to own Stuckey's franchises. He used to own Stuckey stores, and he literally took our vendors and started Buc-ee's, which sounds a lot like Stuckey's. But having said that, we dropped the ball, you know. Mm-hmm. It was out of our hands when Buc-ee's was founded. Buc-ee's was founded in the early 80s. So I go to Buc-ee's all the time. I'm getting some.
Yeah.
Okay. So I study them. Am I the only one who's hearing the reverb?
No, we can hear that. Tom Lee, please mute yourself there, please. We're getting feedback from you. Just call me the Zoom Nazi. Sorry, people.
Somebody said that, you know, there's a Howard Johnson sign at the Henry. I think you were interested in a real one.
Is it working now? Oh, still going.
Again, I just have to say that if everybody will mute themselves on the Zoom, if you don't know how, we can show you how. If you want to tell us that you don't know how, we need to show you how, please.
Do you know if there were architects of the different store versions? A name of it?
There we go. Okay, I do. I would say where we differ from Buc-ee's is if you've been there, it's the size of like 2 football fields. It's huge, and we're more of a unique experience. And there's a lot I honestly really admire about them. I mean, I study all, I guess, a competition. I also think of them as collaboration because there's opportunities for us to partner now that we're making candy. Shoot, if Buc-ee's called us and wanted us to make their pecan log roll, I might be up for it. It'd be good income. So imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. Buc-ee's absolutely was inspired by Stuckey's. I don't know if they'd ever admit it, but it's a really, really big store. They have 120 gas pumps. They don't have any seating. So the concept of like buying food and walking around the stores and spending money definitely was something that my grandfather started. But he wanted more of an intimate, personal experience. And I don't get that when I go to Buc-ee's. And that's not to slam them. It's just not what I want. I prefer a smaller store where I really feel like I've got a sense of the place, and it's more of a unique, small, personalized. So we're just different. But absolutely, people ask me all the time if I've heard of Buc-ee's. And yes, of course, I've heard of Buc-ee's. I stop there all the time. And you can order our product at www.stuckeys.com. I saw that on the feed.
So did you mention, do you know the names of architects of the two different store versions?
I would have to look on the plans and see if it's on there. I believe it was an Atlanta firm.
Okay.
Oh, somebody sent a bunch of stuff on Buc-ee. Thank you. And I love that they've got a mascot. That's something Jamie and I are working on. We're thinking we should have a Stuckey squirrel. Buc-ee's has a really cute beaver. I have to hand it to him. That beaver is adorable. Yeah, lots of good history here on our Arch Beaver Applin. My understanding from my father's former partners is that that's the guy that owns some Stuckeys. Yeah.
Is there a story behind the red and yellow signage scheme and the typography style? Did your grandfather design that himself?
That was my grandfather's signature. And the red and white, the red and yellow is just eye-catchy. That all the signs that you see are, pretty much, I mean, you can just count probably a dozen major franchise chains that have the red and the yellow. It just grabs the eye. Interesting, if you ever go see my grandfather's grave in Eastman, Georgia, it has a Stuckey's logo on it. I've always wanted to put a billboard at the grave site saying, like, 20 yards to the Stuckey's gravesite, and you just passed the Stuckey's gravesite. But I'm probably the only one who would find that funny.
Erica said the stripe design through is fantastic.
Thank you. I wish Mac were on the line. I'll have him listen to this. The designer's amazing. Why did my grandfather sell Stuckey's? Can I answer that one, Michael?
Sure.
He made a lot of money. Because I asked my dad, I'm like, why didn't he give it to you? You could have run it. My dad's like, I had political aspirations. I wanted to do my own thing. But really, he grew up poor. He was a product of the Depression. And he made a ton of money off of selling Stuckey's. And I think it's interesting to me looking back on the entrepreneurs of that time, like Harlan Sanders and Clemens Wilson, so many of them, Howard Johnson, they sold their stores. And nowadays, that wealth is passed on. Truett Cathy has passed on his wealth. You've seen the Waffle House. Joe Rogers has passed on the wealth. But a lot of them in those early years, like there was really almost like a badge of honor. Like you built this thing and then you sold it and you made a ton of money. And my dad's like, he just wanted to cash out, and he traveled the world and he lived a nice life. And he and my grandmother just, they had a beautiful vacation home on the coast of Georgia. So I think and his health was not good. He died young. He died at age, I think I'm right on this, 66. So his health was poor when he sold. He knew it was going downhill, but he lived another, 13 years after he sold. But I do remember he was kind of slowing down when I was a kid. Those are but the cool thing is I was 12 when he died. I do have very strong memories of going and visiting the candy plant. Even though it was out of the family, he was still involved. And I remember visiting the candy plant with him. I remember visiting the stores with him. I remember visiting his office. He still kept an office. And I remember always wanting to go play office. So maybe it's a precursor of my future.
There's a question for both Stephanies, I think. Are other owners thinking of trying to historically designate any of the Stuckey's buildings?
Not that I know of. That would be a cool project. There are a handful that I think might be worthy of it. Frankly, so many of them just don't. They've been bastardized. It put like plastic awning on them. They've changed color. Like I think there'd need to be some work done. What do you think, Stephanie?
As a State Historic Preservation Office employee, I would encourage someone to think about nominating, because I think that I haven't heard of any movements at this time, but I think that anybody can sponsor a nomination. So I'd encourage somebody, at least in Georgia, to pursue it. And, in any other state where you live, talk to your State Historic Preservation Office about whether one's been listed and whether things like Stuckey's have been listed, because it certainly, there is a lot of significance to the sorts of things we're talking about tonight, the roadside movement, the mid-20th century, et cetera.
The one in Paxico, Kansas is one of the best examples. And I would love to restore that. I've got a list. I've got a spreadsheet of the ones I would love to buy and restore. So that's my goal is to make enough money from selling the product where I can just start buying these stores. I've tried to get investors and it's just, people don't get the vision. So somebody asked about the civil rights movement. I'm trying to see that one.
During the civil rights movement, Stuckey's was integrated. Was there a point when it wasn't, and how did it come about?
No, it was always integrated. My grandfather said the only color he discriminated against, or the only people he discriminated against, were people who didn't have money. So he just said, if you had money to spend, you were welcome in my stores. And I asked my dad actually 2 weeks ago when I was home visiting. My dad's 86. He's still very alert. And I asked him, why didn't we ever have like a store burned down or cross burning or like some repercussions for being integrated? And my dad said Stuckey's was on the outskirts of towns. So people really didn't pay attention as much. Like we were on the highways, and he said people just didn't it just didn't cross people's radars, and it was quiet. Like, I have combed through hundreds of archival images trying to see images of African Americans at Stuckey's, and I found like 2. There's just not that many, and I think it was just because it wasn't something that we publicized. It was just done. And the really touching thing is, I can't tell you how many African Americans have come to me. As recently as Sunday, I had an African American man in his 60s tell me, we always stopped at Stuckey's, and when I was a kid, I didn't know why, but as an adult, I realized it was the only place we could stop. And I've had a lot of people tell me stories about, Black people tell me stories about, how much it meant to them that they knew they could always stop there and that we were a safe place. Okay, the Arkansas folks, get in touch with me. I will send you my spreadsheet of all the store locations.
Yeah, I can send you the comments, but I don't know if there's questions. Any other specific questions?
Yeah, I agree. It'd make a great documentary. Yeah.
I'm curious about the beer. For those who don't know, there is a brewery here in Atlanta called Wild Heaven, and they do offer a Stuckey's beer. And I know that some of the merchandise, and I believe the beer as well, is available on Stuckey's website, right? So how did you get the brewery into being interested in partnering with Stuckey's? How did you make that connection?
Yeah, that's like worlds colliding. It was my previous life as this. My past is not only an environmental attorney, but I was a state representative for 14 years. Actually followed in my grandfather's footsteps. He served in the Georgia legislature as well. And I worked on beer legislation, and I was the author of the bill that enabled high alcohol beer to be sold in Georgia. So I know all the craft brewery community through my prior career. And I knew the owner of Wild Heaven Brewery, and I knew they like to experiment with different flavors of beer, and I like beer. And I said, you should do a pecan lager beer. And it's really, that was a marketing play. Like, we've made almost no money from that, like actual cash dollars, but it was the marketing. We donated to them the pecans. We get a very modest amount of every, can sold. You can't buy it online, unfortunately, because Georgia beer law still needs some reforming, but you can go to Wild Heaven Beer. They have gone through 2 batches and they need to do a 3rd batch. We also have Stuckey beer t-shirts and hats that are selling quite nicely.
Someone asked, are you?
And it's really good beer. I have to say, it is really, it's not cloyingly sweet. It is delicious beer. So they need to brew another batch.
Are you selling candy in retail locations outside of Stuckey's, and where?
We've got some 300 retail partners. That's how I turned a profit within 6 months of buying a company that had been losing money for years. I just started, 1, branding and letting people know we're still around, and there's a Stuckey running company again, so we're making a comeback. And 2, selling to non-branded stores, because there's not enough stores out there that are branded as a Stuckey's to generate the profit we need to really make this company a national brand again. So we're in 250 Ace Hardware stores in the Midwest. We're in Dollywood's gift shop. We're in the Jekyll Island gift shop. We're Ace Costello's in New York and Pennsylvania. Urban Artifacts in Peoria, Illinois. Comanche's Attic in San Antonio, Texas. Born Again Gifts in Denver, North Carolina. Like, that's how we're bringing back the brand. We're in Westgate Resorts. We're about to launch in Easy Marts, 250 locations in Arkansas, Illinois, and Texas. So we're just selling our product. I'm setting up a meeting with the CEO of Cracker Barrel. So knock on wood, would love to see us in Cracker Barrel. I just heard from the president of Cracker Barrel. So would absolutely love Cracker Barrel to sell our product. And on our website.
I think that's all I see for questions. I can send you the comments.
I'm loving the comments. Thank you all. Like, just reach out to me. Maybe I'll type my information, but contact me. I just feel like I'm part of your community. You're part of my community. Like, this is, to me, this is so much bigger than, I'm not rebuilding Stuckey's. I'm trying to revive the road trip and that experience. And that's what SCA does. And that's what Docomomo does. And so I just feel like we're all part of this community that loves preserving these amazing roadside places. And Stuckey's is just one of many of these.
Yes. But so you are showing your journey on your Facebook page.
Yes, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram, and Pinterest. I post every day. Please follow me. You'll see my journey. And Jamie's helping me with that. We've got a book deal. We're working on a book. And we do emails on a regular basis, like I said earlier, and the emails really tell stories as well. Jamie, we need to do more storytelling now.
Yeah. The thing is the challenge, as I said, is that there's too many. I mean, it's almost too many stories. It's just tons of content. And so the challenge has been paring it down to get the message across. But then now that we've done that, as I said, we've been having tons of fun just telling everyone's stories associated with Stuckey's. And the other thing is that just the brand recognition that you get, like, as an example, people want to work with Stuckey's, even though they're not quite sure where it is in the business world these days. Like your buddy with Wild Heaven, he wanted to work with Stuckey's. Like, it would, to him, the brand was like really stands out, and also the pecan log roll, right? So it's been a lot of fun to just sort of like play with that stuff and play with the brand. And then I think also what your grandfather and what really presented with the stores and what you talked about was that he had a real sense of fun. Like, he understood that, yes, like, this is a road trip, right? And it's like, we're going to have rubber alligators and drinking birds and mynah birds. And it's like, you're getting off the highway. Let's have a little fun. And yeah. And it's also telling his story. One of the stories that we had someone send in during the story contest was, he was the son of a guy who worked for your granddad. And his one memory of your granddad was going into the office where your granddad was. And your granddad said, "Here, you sit in the big seat over here." And he let him sit in the big seat, this little kid, like 8 years old. And then he and his father had a meeting. And he just thought, that's just what your granddad was all about. And that's kind of what the stores are all about. Tons of people have stories about WS Stuckey that sort of mention that kind of stuff.
Did you share that?
So again, it's, what's that?
I think the other night, Stephanie showed me an image of the building that you wanted to be a museum. Did you show that?
Well, just the original Stuckey's in Eastman, Georgia. I would love to have that as a museum someday. I have so many Stuckey's old candy boxes and gift tins. I have lots of memorabilia. I have lots of images. Right now, they're just in my house. I have a duplex. And so half of my house is rented out as an Airbnb. And I rent the Airbnb out as take a Stuckey stop. It's full of Stuckey's memorabilia. It's book solid. So that's my side hustle. That's actually how I'm making my money right now as I rebuild this brand. Truth be told, I'm not making a salary until the end of this year. I've like pledged, like everything was just going into rebuilding this brand. But my business partner and I have both pledged we're getting a salary by year's end. We're on track for that. But that little Stuckey stop Airbnb is what's keeping me going right now. But every single day, I'm not exaggerating, I get 5 to 10 stories about Stuckey's every single day. And it's not just I love stopping. It's my parents met at a Stuckey's. They had their first date at a Stuckey's, and every year on their anniversary, my grandfather gave my mother a pecan log roll and she just died. Like, I get those stories regularly. So I feel like I'm so much more than the CEO. I'm like the keeper of the brand.
All right. Well,
Michael, you went black. Is that the signal? Like,
no.
I'm.
No. But I think we have to let you go back to your life. And thank you so much.
Oh, wait, what's the title of my book? Somebody said, happy to follow you now. I see you're on Instagram. That's the title of your book. What's the title of the book? Stuckey Stop?
Keeper of the brand.
Keeper of the brand. Yeah, I joke. I'm like, my goal is actually not to be chief executive officer. It's just the company needed one. Like, ideally, I hand off all the stuff to my business partner and I just be the chief brand officer. Like, I would be so happy just like off in Stuckey land talking about road trips, but I have to run the business for now.
No, I went to get my calendar. The next presentation is August 25th at 8 p.m. And that's Jessica Ann Schutz. She photographs mall ruins in America.
Oh my gosh.
So we're going to learn about the failure of the malls in America, I guess. But she has great photography. So.
You should follow This is Dan Bell on YouTube if you're interested in old malls. He has like tons of videos of old malls and it's addictive to watch. That's like my binge watch is This is Dan Bell and the ghost malls.
Okay.
So I'll close on that and say thank you, Jamie, for joining us. And Jamie needs to become a member. He's a kindred spirit.
Maybe you and Stephanie can plan, a road trip so we can come and visit.
And Jamie and Stephanie and I are all in Atlanta, so I see us. Well, Jamie's like traveling a lot, but we need to all connect. Anyone else from Atlanta on this call, like, just reach out to me.
Yeah, Nancy's gonna get in touch with you. Georgia girl.
Awesome.
Yep.
I'm coming to Atlanta, Stephanie, for the next 2 weeks, and I would really love to see if we could get together. It's Nancy Sturm.
Yes.
Or at least talk more on the phone. All right.
Please.
Right.
Anyone coming through Atlanta, come visit me. And I got the Airbnb. If you're an SEA member, I'm going to give you a huge discount. Come visit.
Okay.
Thanks, y'all. Good evening.
See you again, too.
Okay. Thank you, everyone.
You too. Yeah.
Good night.
Thanks, SCA. Good night.
Good night.